title for you. Enhanced it a bit since then, so you can let us know the title as we go along.
Cool, thank you. Right, I'll just try and. I've only got one screen because of how it's worked at the moment, so I'll share my screen as it stands and then open up the presentation, and then I'll be a bit flying by the seat of my pants. Can you see my screen? Is that working?
Not yet.
Yeah, excellent. Right, let me start from the scratch and that helps. So firstly, thank you for having me. As a fellow of the PWI, I take it's a great pleasure to take part in section meetings and take part in the track community. So thank you very much for Greg and the Glasgow section for the invitations to do this. Apologies, there was a bit of a breakdown in communications. At one point, I was doing this with Daniel Berggraf, who's my colleague from the Netherlands and who's been doing PBM with as part of the Asset Rail JV for a while. He's the area track equivalent of the area track engineer looking over the rest, and he's also been over here in the UK doing some work with Network Rail on Wales and Western. But there was as I said, a breakdown in comms, and unfortunately he can't be with us tonight because he was double booked. So apologies for that. So this will be my take on PBM, and perhaps not so much with some of the information you want from Daniel, but I've spent time with him and understand some of the nuances that I can explain ahead or outside of the slides we're going to go through. So breaking that into four sections and a bit of Q&A. PBM in the Netherlands and what was the catalyst for change? What is performance-based maintenance? Outcomes delivered by Asset Rail, and then how PBM could support GBR ambitions, and that's in line for the WISPs and Asset, just as a flavour to how we see it to play.
Jason, sorry to interrupt you. We can't see your screen just yet. It's just your camera.
Okay. I don't know what's happening. I thought I'd shared that. Hang on. The joys of Teams. Right. You're there now, yeah? Is that?
Yes.
Visible?
Yep.
So yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, 4 sections in Q&A. PBM in the Netherlands, catalyst for change. What is performance-based maintenance? Because it might not be a terminology you're familiar with. Some of the principles you will be, but the terminology and how it's derived is slightly different. Outcomes delivered by Asset Rail, which is the 60-40% JV between Arcadis and Jura Vermeer, the Dutch contractor. A combination of how PBM could support GBR ambitions, and Q&A. So catalyst for change. For those not familiar with the Dutch network, will not maybe appreciate some of the challenges. It's possibly the most similar to the UK network than any of our European colleagues around. It's very compact, but it has a very intense service frequency. If you think there's things like Amsterdam to Rotterdam are only 80 miles apart and have an intercity type service, but at 10-minute sort of intervals, you can appreciate some of the challenges. It's very heavily trafficked, and there's a lot of freight that's going to the North Sea ports as well as commuter lines as well. The one context that selecting this, there is a Dutch high-speed line, but that isn't maintained as part of this process. That's as a separate entity, so it only considers the domestic ProRail network. So ProRail being the equivalent of Network Rail, they're a state-owned entity who took the decision to outsource maintenance. So that the network is mostly electrified, around 7,000 kilometres of track. You can see around 6,500 turnouts, 11,000 signals, level crossings. And so a lot of similarities with Network Rail. Not so many tunnels, as you'd imagine, and very flat. So not some of the challenging gradients, but some challenges. And some of you who've been around long enough will recognise some of the challenges that we're about to discuss. So you should imagine state-owned enterprise in the Netherlands around 2000, so similar timescale for when a bit later than when Network Rail was privatised in the sector, but it was their maintenance was going to be a prescriptive maintenance regime driven by engineering standards, increasing asset failures, punctuality falling, increased operational costs, customer satisfaction impacted by the railway performance. As I say, that for ProRail, Reed, Network Rail, or Railtrack at the time, there were lots of commonality and parents, and it's interesting to note when this was taking part. This was around 2000, so that there was already that lessons learned from ProRail of how privatisation of the railway was not, shall we say, working too well in the UK. So ProRail themselves were influenced by government, as you would imagine, and so to go and reached out for some consultancy support with, and from Arcadis was part of that consultancy support to look at ways of delivering improvements and developing a different model. So together with other consultants, Arcadis supported ProRail and looked at various different ways of using good asset management techniques aligned with the ISO 55001 or whatever it was called at that time, about asset management plans, FMECA uses, understanding failures, and all that sort of thing to bring some in. And then went into it, and then that influenced a decision for ProRail to come to market with 20 sections of route as contracts, performance-based maintenance contracts, and that was around 2006, I believe. I'll come on to that in a minute. So what is performance-based maintenance? They moved away from railway maintenance on a prescriptive model to this performance-based maintenance model. So performance-based maintenance is elements of reliability-centered maintenance plus good asset management principles, understanding mean time between failures, understanding service affecting failures, understanding condition assessment, and bringing that all into virtual loop. So it's not, some of the principles of that, of what we do in the UK are not too far apart, but it's how you bring that together and use the data. So ProRail decided to let the 5 to 10 year performance-based contracts and transferred accountability for performance. But they then understood some of the failures that were in the Railtrack UK failings in how they managed their failures, and worked that into a much more mature contracting mechanism that allowed the contractors, leeway is possibly a weak way of describing it, but some bandwidth to think about how they could do things differently. That their KPIs weren't prescriptive; there were some things they had to major on, and that was that's focused on the high level of independence and responsibility within the boundaries. And this matrix at the bottom here, if I can try and move that screen out of the way, I can't quite do that. Is how they are doing it. So and what they're saying is, what this matrix is meant to say is that the Ramsey process across the top is how they broke it down. So there are things that are prescribed within the contract that you can't get out of around safety and health. So accident clauses or health and well-being, compliance with UK, Dutch standards or European standards that you cannot contract out of those. Those are obligated, and you must. Again, on certain health, safety, environment elements, there's a very strict mandating process to make sure you're compliant. And then around reliability, availability, maintainability, there is KPIs on leading and lagging, but there's a much more, possibly not fluid again, it's possibly not the right answer, but it's much more open to prove an open, mature dialogue to demonstrate how you're achieving that. And it's not so prescriptive that if you're trend the wrong way, ProRail will get involved. But as long as you're showing the right trends and offering the right service levels, they don't get involved too much in what happens at the base level. So, as I said, the Arcadis team were involved within ProRail and developing the idea of the PBM model. And so once they knew that ProRail were going to come to market, we cleared the fact that we weren't going to be conflicted out, and so approached a contractor to work at it. And so in 2006, Asset Rail formed as a 60-40 JV between Jura Vermeer and Arcadis, with this asset management framework and operational railway environment. These will expand in a minute into a bit more detail, but it gives a continuous improvement by closing the plan, do, check, act cycle in the process, and it touches on that asset owner, asset management service role provider process you can see on the right hand side of the screen there, and it's driven innovation, focus and outcomes, and that's the control room, and there was the simple thinking around this control room at the start. It was taking 8 minutes to get information from ProRail into the Asset Rail comms team to pull out failures. But considering that's 8 minutes of time you're then paying out for the failure, the thinking was, well, we'll just take the feed directly from ProRail as it comes into ProRail into there, and they developed that. And then things like the weather mapping that helps to understand impact coming in, and preparedness and elements like that. So there's a lot of information on those feed. So yeah, and they built dashboards and all sorts of that from that. So coming back to this asset management framework, this is taken from the ISO 55000 process, the asset owner role, the asset management role, the service provider role, and effectively at this point, the asset owner role that ProRail set out in their contract, and the strategies they want to achieve, what their targets are, and then within the asset management role, and this is mainly led by Arcadis with input from the Jura Vermeer team. They work out the best ways to deliver the performance that's required, and whether that be through the use of FMECAs or specific asset strategies or various elements like that takes place. And then the Jura Vermeer team deliver the service provide role and play that through into work execution and feed information back. We'll come out onto the page in the next slide, but this feedback loop is part of the virtuous cycle that enables this process to be understood. So the PBM, it's data driven as well, and that's what part of the process of this feedback process is. There's the data gathering and the formation of the FMECA, and the FMECA is the key. And it's not just discipline specific FMECAs, it's looking at the combined. So if we look at S&C FMECAs or types of S&C, it looks at individual componentry down to in the ballast and load. It doesn't spring it down into an S&C bias or a P-way bias or a E&P bias. It considers it all, because a lot of the time there were gaps in that process. And so you've got the data gathering, data analytics, and the FMECA into a maintenance strategy that is then delivered with the information from rapid response from operations room, with the continuous leading back into the asset management. And it's this cycle that drives through. Talking to Daniel about this, some of the challenges when he was over when we were talking about the challenges the Network Rail has, certainly about the patrolling and inspection regime. He was surprised that we put so many people back out on ballast so often. It's something like 16 weeks for BVIs in the Netherlands, because they understand what the inspection is trying to mitigate against, and so they've looked at the data and said, well, we need to do it 16 weeks because the data we have shows that we don't influence failures, doing it more regularly. So why bother? It's bringing this thinking of if you don't need to do it, why do you do it type process in it, and looking at the benefit. It's a similar about rail defects. Daniel was saying that he had a challenge from ProRail about the amount of rail defects that he had on our share of the network, and they were saying they're RCF type, squats, wheel burns type that aren't getting into performance affecting failures. I could spend more money trying to identify more and close more, but or identifying propagations at levels than it would if they came to surface and I just planned on replacing closure rails. If you think about putting a closure rail in, probably what, £5,000 to £10,000. How many times do we have it? Or if we're grinding, you could cover it over shift. How many times do I have? Much thousands of pounds am I spent on undertaking asset analytics and information, more analytics to reduce the level of what it was. It was a very mature conversation to prove the point to ProRail that he didn't need to spend the money to get a better result because it wasn't impacting on service. And I'll come back to the continuous improvement. You see at the top of that slide there's the client requirements. So that is the ProRail asset management strategy requirements as a client, and through the FMECA cycle. So we've got the FMECA, understand why things fail, and what the underlying or service affecting failures are, or anything like that in there, and bring that into that plan for the maintenance tasks that we need to do to mitigate that. Plan those tasks to deliver the interventions when, where, how intervals. The maintenance work results in evaluation, and feed that back through. So you've got that correlation that your work has been successful. How many times have we heard in the past that people have gone to fix a fault one night and the fault's been back the next? That they want to make sure, and the staff take accountability of their own work, that it's done and is resolved, and then following that evaluation feeds back into the FMECA and builds through. And this comes to one of the key differences we found between ourselves, BAM, who are a fellow contractor over there, and Volker and Construct, is that we apply the FMECA and continue to review that to understand that any triggers for failures or anything of that will drive performance deterioration, whereas a lot of the contractors, certainly Construct, don't understand that because they asked us in the past to build their FMECAs for them. And it showed they didn't understand quite that it should be a live process and revisited. This is a picture of the operation rooms as they just expanded, and it picks up on that point I was trying to say, that it's the live data sources they've brought into the process, not just looking at track circuits or train detection elements or signals or anything like that from the network. They're looking at data sources far and wide that's publicly available that can influence failures, to understand mean time to recovery and make sure that we're delivering on time. And it's this different thinking that the contractors incentivise. It hasn't, anybody who was in the IMC 2000s or the RTA 1 asset management contracts with Railtrack, they were very prescriptive. You were looking at certain things and reporting at certain things. This allows you different thinking and doesn't tie you down to specific behaviours. Don't get me wrong, there are financial benefits and there are financial fines, for want of a better expression, for not performance. So everybody is incentivised to deliver more and not to underperform. And I'm not sure that was quite the same within the network Railtrack environment. And coming into section 3, it shows the outcomes delivered by the asset rail approach. As a highlight at the top, I might have mentioned it earlier. Now we are I think it's 7 contracts selling over 2,000 kilometres of the network. It should be 8, but we've been awarded 8, but we don't start officially on that till I think it's October. That makes us the largest maintenance contractor in the Netherlands. 64% reduction in failure in technical issues since 2010. So around the PBM process was launched about 2006, and you can see we had some spikes, and I think that this shows that the process isn't perfect and there's some learning's gone away, but then the general long, you can see, and so when we started in 2006, some spikes to get to 2010, when people were learning and identifying things and picking things through. And then you can see the general long-term trend. Daniel will probably thank you that there's not the 2021 data on there because it's COVID. There seems to be some problems with performance that they don't understand. So he's quite relieved that data isn't publicly available yet. The mean time to repair for failures has been reduced by 51%. You can see that. So that's given a real benefit. And that's taken into account that they've looked at certain ways of doing things. So they now have some electrical maintenance vehicles, because at the time, some of the neighbourhoods they work within, very like ourselves, are very noise restrictive, and they couldn't do certain maintenance tasks because it went firing up or accessing by a diesel-powered plant. And so they invested in electric, or effectively hybrid vehicles. So they drive to site under diesel, petrol, and then access the rail under an electric environment, so they could get to site quicker and do the maintenance without affecting the neighbours or getting complaints or anything like that. So it's that thinking coming to the fore. It's not just following through, and because they can do that and they get financial reward for that, there's that incentivization to think about how you can do things differently. This was a little bit trying to show some more of the influence and expanding on the previous one. You can see how the technical failures is the yellow in this bottom right hand screen, how we've had technical failures down and pulled them right down, and how influence on signalling and track failures have come down. You can see that. Not surprised to anybody who in the rail industry that signalling failures or signalling related failures are the biggest driver in faults, because it stops trains and has a big disrupting service. But you can see how that trends down, and similarly track faults are down low. And you can see how it looks the region, and again a downward trend there. And this one shows the benefit of punctuality changes as the introduction of all the PBM contracts. This isn't cleansed by asset rail. This is the whole of the month. So a real good thing. You can see from 2009, the introduction, there were some quick improvements, benefits, and Daniel attributes these to other measures that ProRail were introducing at the time, as thinning out some timetable challenges, doing some asset renewal performances that gave them instant benefit, and then they had some spikes there. So, and then you can see that after some embedment, it's proved some real benefit going forward to 2020. You can see that's a real thing. And if you look down here, I mean, this is what is it? 1 in 5 trains were being delayed. A real challenge for the network, and also the sustainability of the network. If you can't use it and you've got no certainty, you get turned off from using it. So a real benefit shown through it. And again, for the Dutch taxpayer, savings of €1 billion compared to the old contracts, and PBM is 40% cheaper and giving a better service. So there's the step change that ProRail took the decision to in 2006-ish has demonstrably given them a benefit. Come to section 4, and I'll phrase this about how PBM could use support rail performance in the UK, because this is obviously where we are at the moment. Got one of the challenges from Network Rail. They've got their funding statement from the government. It's showing that they effectively got to reduce maintenance levels or accept a poorer performing asset than we currently have. So and this was taken from the presentation that we gave, that our sector director Chris Pike and Daniel gave to the RIA and wider industry last month, I think it was. So the whole GBRT, whole industry strategic plan, has certain objectives about meeting customers' needs and delivering financial sustainability. And literally, this is what how we believe that performance-based maintenance could help in increasing value for money. And we hopefully I've just demonstrated you from the performance that the cost of maintenance could be reduced by 40% with PBM embedded, reduction in technical failures by 65%, and mean time to recovery by 51%. So, demonstrable improvements for the customer and for the industry. Maintaining a safe railway as part of the safe transport system. We hear the challenge from the unions about cutting staff would impact on safety. The focus we have under the PBM is to look at asset criticality, look at performance levels, understand those failure modes. So that allows us to understand where our critical assets are, and it allows us to flex, so we understand what assets impact on performance, what assets you can move down the line without impacting on performance, and so it allows you to flex and play with the plans and deliver, and it shows how the financial penalties and the benefits can underpin safety performance. We look at the past, and I remember when I joined AMEC, pinned on the notice board was something, I think it was either from the Guardian or from the Times, about how the AMEC share price at the time had gone through the roof because of the contribution from I think we had two frame contracts, and one was Wessex and one was Sussex at the time, and how that had benefited from them. And I think that political memory of privatisation in the UK is in there, that it actually just fed the shareholders of the big companies and didn't actually give much benefit. So again, we show how that it doesn't do that. We get financial sustainability, reducing costs of government. You can see there the cost of maintenance in the UK, 54.3 kilometres per track kilometre, as against in the Netherlands of 20.3 thousand per track kilometre. And they were taken from, as you can see at the bottom, on the ORR and the ProRail yearly budget, so similar timescales, and not so impacted on inflation as probably would be today. Ensuring a sustainable balance of fair fee and government funding. Again, better affordability, so it gives continued investment for rail. Increased efficiency of operations and asset management. Again, gives that benefit to the taxpayer. And I've whistled through that. I hope that's okay. Slightly 20 minutes. I'm sorry if that's too short. Does anybody have any questions?
That was great, Jason. Thanks for that. I'll just flick to the chat and I'll see what we've got there. Yep, so got one there from David Lindsay. So he's asking, how easy was it to tie in with or evolve from legacy asset management systems when bringing in PBM? Presuming Dutch Railways would have something similar to NR Ellipse previously.
That's a good point, David, and I could almost have planted that for you to line up. That was one of the big challenges, and that's why producing those FMECAs takes a lot of effort up front. It wasn't clean, it wasn't easy, and they went through probably a 2-year phase of cleaning data, mapping data, and refining data to get it in to be understandable. And that plays into the experience. We've been doing some work with Wales and Western, as I mentioned, and the data that Network Rail have is similarly in that challenge of how you get it into commonality, shall we say, to get to influence decision making. It's a real challenge on data sources coming in, and coming back to the Dutch, they think they've got it there now, but they're pretty honest and say that it's a continuing challenge, because as technology evolves, you've got to make sure the system is able to be agile enough to keep up with it. But data is one of the challenges they faced, and it, as I say, it took them 2 to 3 years to get that model clean and to demonstrate how they got that tangible investment decisions.
We'll just jump to one in the room, Jason. So Tom Wilson's going to ask one here.
Supplementary on that subject, Jason. As you've said, one of the critical aspects of that continuous improvement is the accuracy of the asset database. How would you see in the UK the accuracy of the UK asset database being verified? And how long will that take, do you think?
Yeah, good point. So it is a challenge, and so the problem, I don't think so. The Ellipse database isn't too far out. The problem we've had with the data is it's not the single component. It's when people and come back to the point about reliability. It's the data that's fed back on top of that about accuracy of fault fixing or what the underlying fault is. There is such a discrepancy or even a lack of information coming back from site that allows you to accurately identify within your database what asset you've actually affected if you go into sleeper by sleeper basis or if you go into point motor basis. I mean, the stuff we were finding on Wales and Western was the techs had gone to site and said hose blown, repaired hose, refilled with hydraulic fluid. And because of the pressures on site, the guys needed to get out of there. That's the fault they put in, and that's what was fed back to Sigler and into I forget the name of the database that records the failures, but that's what then sits on that database. So when you try and correlate the data and understand the root cause, it becomes very difficult. And it's similar with tamping records. You can get the base data quite clean, but unless everything feeds into it and can correlate that it is that asset at X mileage and Y yards, and that's what you're reporting against, that's when the difficulty comes in. And that's why the likes of GPS and recording become even more critical. But until you get that asset back in, that asset aligned, it's a real challenge.
I think what you're saying is that you would have to start with what's out there at the moment, like a baseline. That would have to be verified, accurately identified, a mileage or a yardage or a change or a GPS coordinate assigned to it. And then when the asset is renewed, the as-built records would have to be accurate enough to update that database, diligent enough to keep it going as accurate records. And then when something went wrong, actually the asset that's gone wrong correctly identified and the problem sorted, recorded.
Yeah.
But all this is part of this performance-based maintenance is underpinned by what you said is a financial incentive to reduce repair times. And what you'll get is the human factors element in it, and that the guys that go out to repair it have repaired it and they're on their way home, and they won't want to spend too long on paperwork, so they'll just say either no fault found or we bodged it and scarpered and call it something simple.
That's an interesting point as well, Tom, because actually the TUPE regs that we apply quite stringently in the UK don't seem to be applied in the same manner in the Netherlands. So they do protect employment, but if there are people who don't toe the party line about putting the right information onto the forms and filling it up, they are dealt with quite severely. Their employment laws seem to support the employer shall we say, in the right way, that poor performance is not supported. So they have actually, the process they've done is they've been able to upskill people. People have readily accepted that. They've also there's also that they feel part of the solution, not the problem, and they do get visited by senior management at the time, and senior management do go on site and do random visits and talk to the staff to get that honest feedback. And there is a very clean feedback loop, and people are actively supported in giving their feedback honestly.
It sounds like in the Netherlands, there's more of a competence management system, or a more robust competence management system, and an involvement, a professionalism, if you will. And my next question was about who identifies the root cause of the failure in that FMECA process, and who ensures the competence of that individual to do that?
I'm not sure on the competency process into the root cause, but the analysis, each component is each, if you like, system is broken down by component, and often they'll take at the start the manufacturer's service life or recommended life, and then revisit that and feedback back in. So it was interesting again coming back to Wales and Western. Daniel was saying the Wales and Western had just gone through the process of renewing the track detection process through there from axle count, from track circuit to axle counters. Yet if you look at the underlying manufacturer's instruction or service life, saying they're both, the mean time between failures should be around 11 years or something, and so actually it's how you treat and maintain each asset, or perhaps how you don't treat and maintain each asset, that gives you that performance benefit, or perhaps it's the external influences that come into the environment, like litter or metallic objects that can cause bridging of track circuits, that make people want to choose axle counters over track circuits. And so that I can't actually answer your question about competency, but they do start by breaking it down, looking at the component life, looking at what the manufacturer said, and then just playing that feedback through from what they're finding on site.
Smashing. Jason, just jump back to something Ryan spotted. Seeing the slides, was that just a typo, or is there a direct comparison between the costs for UK?
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't. It's meant to be kilometres squared or kilometres cubed. They're meant to be footnotes to references, something at the bottom of the slide. So it was a footnote 2 and a footnote 3 as references. So sorry, I missed out the space. Said the slides were quite cobbled together at a rush this afternoon. I was putting those references in, and they had dots by them before, and I thought, well, actually it's not that clean, but I should have probably just left dots or stars by them. Sorry. So they are directly comparable, yes.
Okay, so it's both cubed then, is it? We're saying
it's both linear kilometres. There should be a space, and it's a reference to a dot.
Yep, cool, smashing. Mark was saying that he was going to mention the sanitizing of existing data. As we all know, only as good as the person that is entering the info at the time. Limiting the number of people dabbling would help.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's an interesting, and I've just been doing some work for another operator in the UK who does looking at a degradation model, and one of the challenges they're openly saying in their documentation they've produced that the data quality is a massive challenge for them as well, and they're relatively new. We are moving into a data-centric world, and yet everybody is struggling with the quality of data. And you're right, it comes down to the individual on the ground, perhaps the system they're filling in, and what their parameters on their digital tool they're filling in allow them to fill in. I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm sure there'll be some development in that.
Yeah, I would just add as well. I mean, there's a vast amount of data recorded. It's not as if we're lacking knowing what's out there, but I think it's the gathering of it and the collating of it and sorting of it and keeping top of it to get the most out of it. Sorry, having tons of data, if it's just lying there or not sorted, it doesn't really mean anything. Yeah.
As Mark's just said.
Yeah, I'll just add Mark's last comment there was he recently undertook data gap analysis for EWR, and there were some curious combinations. West Coast Main Line with flat bottom, Sense 60 on one leg and Bullhead on the other.
Yes.
See what's Mark. The same mileage and 1 metre along transition rails.
Yeah.
Step one, sort out the rail posts, or here's a wacky idea, have kilometrage posts.
Yeah.
But they're in the long grass, Mark.
Yeah.
It's warm. They're wooden and round.
Yeah. It is absolutely, the whole data is absolutely mental. I mean, Network Rail, one of the challenges, I think the Intelligent Infrastructure Project identified it as there's so much data, but actually sometimes it's conflicting. And so you've got this challenge of you're trying to make engineering judgments or judgments based on information. And if your information is conflicting, you're in this. it also brings you to stasis, which doesn't help. So understanding that data lake, understanding what is correct, is the new challenge, I think. And that for me, that will ease the engineering decisions the guys and girls on the ground have to make, because it makes it so clear. We've all been there. Most of the people out there are working their damnedest and doing their best endeavours to deliver a railway. They're all mainly passionate railway people, and often the data is the stuff that's stopping them, because it just doesn't make sense. It's having that time and effort, and probably it comes back to Tom's point about competency. Perhaps we need less railway engineers, but more statistical engineers to allow us to understand outliers and what the data is actually telling us, and able to clean it to get to inform the decision making. And that might come back to what Tom was saying about competency, about having the right skill set, because it is how you use the data, what it's saying to you, looking at having that immediate underlying trend.
And then the amount of times as well, even in the design side, as we know, like a lot of data is there, surveys are done, but for whatever reason you can't get your hands on it, and you end up paying for a brand new survey or creating new surveys because you can't make sense of the existing data. So we'd save money in the long run if we could just get a grip on what we have. But.
Yeah, and it comes it's that having the right data, get the right data right once and use it many times. But at least if you've got an error in the data, it's the same error over a number of uses, and it'll appear in that it's not so many different data sets with so many different errors. You narrow down the standard deviation on your error massively by just having one data set that's highly accurate.
Yeah, definitely. John?
I have a question on the system, the PBM system. Bearing in mind of our financial incentives, probably contractual financial incentives to reduce repair times, a little bit of conflict of interest in there. Does the system rely on a self-assurance process, in other words, a competent contractor doing competent work, or is there an independent check process flung in there with some quality assurance embedded in it that is part of the PBM process?
No, and funny enough, I did ask Daniel the question this morning, because he was saying that at first, you don't get paid to revisit and fix a failure, so they know where there's a failure. So it sort of incentivizes you to get it right. There is a self-assurance process, and that's why they have senior management on site to make sure people at random times, they're not there all the time, but to make sure people are doing their stuff. They do have a much mature process around it. I don't know much more about the ins and outs, because again, I haven't really. It's not something we've talked about the process, because that seems to be with the contract to deliver. But they do seem to and when you talk to them, they have a more mature process around it. But they are multi-skilled as well, so that means that the guys who go out to fix the track fault can do some of the competency within S&T as well, so that brings some benefit as well.
Well, that smells like maintainer operator, doesn't it? Last question from me then about PBM. If it was introduced in the UK, do you think that would force a more practical approach, in inverted commas, to the safety arrangements involved in the resolution of faults? Because one of the big things I think when we get a fault reported is the amount of palaver and safety arrangements that we make people go through to ensure they're absolutely safe on site before they even get anywhere near fixing the fault.
I think the safety arrangements are easier. Daniel is when we've looked at how it takes to take a possession and to get on site here, Daniel is quite amazed at the processes that go through. And I think that is part of the benefit. There seems to be not so many parties involved, shall we say. I think the control room does all control, so electrical and signal control. So you don't have if you're taking a possession, you're not talking to multiple parties. If you're getting on site, the signaller is aware and not are there talking it through. So I think there's a much simpler and possibly, I won't say it's much safer, but there's a simpler way of doing it that gives more time on site for fixing. I don't think their possessions are any longer because they have the same challenge that we do. They run services into the night. They're taking intercity, so that they've still got that limited track access, but they do seem to have a better way of taking possessions. Coming back to also about the data, about the handback, there is a process called SPOR data that's been involved about how you get information from projects and maintenance, and the PBM team have worked that through. So again, one of the challenges I think you touched on, Tom, was that clarity of data from projects, and how we all know when we've been in maintenance that the projects team tend to take so long to get the information across, whether that's because it's lacking from contractor side into network rail projects or network rail projects into the contractor, and that process seems to be sped up with this SPOR data process.
I think there was an issue, certainly in the UK, when asked to verify whatever record Network Rail has on track asset data. There are very few people that know the difference between an F27 and an F40 sleeper, or the age of the two of them, or what correct insulator should be fitted or not, or otherwise. In other words, asset data assessment is a skill that's rapidly disappearing in the UK. And it's very difficult to teach young engineers that kind of information. I have to rely on the likes of Jim Watson and his Heritage Railway for me to take engineers in a place of safety and show them the difference between the different parts of the track asset. Therefore, the verification of the current records is a major stumbling block to the whole PBM system.
Yeah, but you should, I take this, they should be able to verify it because you've got these plain line pattern recognition machines that are running around and whizzing around. You've got a lot of data, but again, it comes how do you correlate it all down to the mileage and the meterage and type.
I can tell you the flavour of the crisp packet that is spotted in the 4-foot. The PLPR can't tell you the age of that rail or even the poundage of that rail, the rail weight, nor can it tell you the insulator or the clip or the sleeper type, unless it's the same as the one before. And the asset that you're looking at, you need to, I'm not saying down on hands and knees, but you need to know what you're looking at and be very up close and personal with it. And we don't have very many people left in the industry that can do that.
No, agreed. I mean, that componentry level of knowledge is diminishing, I think. Yeah.
It's not taught, Jason. It should be taught perhaps by PWI. Maybe there could be a course on asset condition inspection that Dr. Brian Counter could run, or something of the like that I could send my budding track designers, track engineers out to learn.
Yeah, you've just talked yourself into that there, Tom.
yeah. But it comes back to that, what you're saying, Tom, about the practical experience. I mean, I started, as Greg said, in maintenance, and you soon understand the need for accuracy in what you're reporting when you're going back to the section manager and saying you found a squat at this mileage, and you go, okay, what sleep is it sitting on? Because I need to make sure I've got the right clips and pads and nylons. And if you get it wrong, certainly the 5 very good section managers I had working for me would soon let me know, because they would take great joy in telling me I was wrong. And in fairness, I buy them a coffee and say thank you very much for telling me I was wrong. Yeah, but you needed that to have that level of understanding and knowledge to ensure you could deliver the maintenance. It's no use turning up on the night with a van full of different types and then trying to walk a mile down the track with 5 different bags of clips and nylons to cover any accommodation. And if you turned out you've got bullhead and you've got flat bottom, you're even looking like a bigger mug, aren't you?
That's correct, and that's all about that. Able to identify what part has actually failed and what you need to go and fix it. We don't often stick new bits in to replace old, that sometimes make do and mend.
Witness.
Hurry up, tight, Mark. One finger, one thumb.
It's easier, Mark. You can just come off mute and ask if you like. Camera phone and picture straight to section manager. Oh. Hello.
Well, hello. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting this because it's it's only as good as the people who are actually entering it. And what you tend to get, as we probably all know, is you get so many different contractors and people coming in and their take on it, and there's a milepost missing, and they've taken it from another datum somewhere, and all of a sudden, as we found in sort of East-West Rail, some of the sort of data, the sort of, data gap analysis, you're looking at things and going, that can't possibly be the case at all. So there's been that many people over the years have put this stuff in, or sometimes not put anything in, and it's just become a bit of a mess. So Network Rail have got all these databases, they've got all this good information, but when you start to drill down into it, you go, some of this just doesn't make any sense. And the guys in the maintenance just don't have the time to sanitize it.
They're dealing with the full part. Then the sense check of the data is the bit that's missing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Any more questions online? Yeah. Feel free to just unmute and chat away, or type if you'd rather. It's up to you.
Again, nobody almost
All right. Any follow-up questions in the room? No? Okay, last chance for any questions. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Jason.
No worries. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Thanks, Jason.
I was going to do an official vote of thanks, but everyone's thanking you anyway, so maybe I'll just leave it.
Okay. Oh, you need to pause. No.
We did an official vote of thanks. Come on, Greg. It was just so I was saying something so people knew we were still here.
Absolutely. No, it's easier if we just say thanks and that's it done. But I'll give you a formal thanks, Jason. So just to say thanks for excellent presentation. It's really real food for thought when you see that approach that the Netherlands are taking to maintenance over there. We started with the introduction to the Dutch rail network, explained that their high-speed lines are separate, they don't follow this system, and also that ProRail are our equivalent of Network Rail, really. It was great to see this method has lasted so long as well. It's not just something that's a flash in the pan and they tried it for a year or two and dropped it. I mean, I'm sure there would be problems in the early stages, but you need to sometimes stick with things just to make sure it's absolutely working or not working. And after all this time, it must be working. And then the graphs you showed us clearly show the reduction in failures, the increase in reliability, punctuality. So, I mean, it sounds great. It reminds me in a lot of ways of the alliance structures we have for renewals over in this country, and this contractor and consultant working together with a client. Similarities in the pay and gain share that alliances have, probably a bit more strict in terms of the maintenance one, and that there's actual penalties if you don't meet certain elements of it. And it sounds really good. I think they've taken a really sensible approach to it, and that they're not just binning all the standards and saying, oh, well, we'll just do one. Is obviously there's key elements that just have to be met, and there's no getting out of that. So, I mean, it sounds like a great approach. It just seems to improve safety. Saves money because we're not doing maintenance just for the sake of it on a cyclic basis. It's maintenance when it's required. And again, as we spoke about, a lot of that has to do with the data quality and data management. So just sounds great to me. And hopefully, Cadis and others will be involved maybe in trying to push the rollout in the UK. So just thanks again, Jason. Thanks for giving us your time for it. And I'll just ask everyone else to thank Jason in the usual manner. Very extended thanks online there.
Very much.
That's great. There's still someone else flashing up on the screen. Maybe it's a late question now. I don't know. Oh, thank you. Yeah. All right, great stuff. I think I'll just finish the online section then if anyone's there's nothing else anyone wants to add.
Thanks very much, Greg.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah. Okay. I'll catch you tomorrow, Jason.
Cool. Thanks, Greg. Take it easy.
Thank you.
Enjoy Danny or Robin's red wine, is it?
Oh, it's mine actually.
Oh.
I have to pay for myself these days, but
Outrageous. Get Robin to pay it.
yeah. Sure I will.
Cool.
All right. Okay. Thanks.
Enjoy a good one.
Cheers.
Take it easy. Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.